few more people joining. All right, it is 7:01, so I want to be cognizant of your time and get started. So first, I just want to start off by thanking you all for being here and for taking a time to learn about a subject that we all have become pretty passionate about. I want to start tonight by just kind of setting the stage and giving you an overview of kind of what to expect. So our goal today is to provide you with a high-level overview of a construct that research has shown to be an absolute game changer for high levels of team performance within an organizational setting. And given the many parallels, which we'll talk about kind of between business and sport, specifically the importance of team cohesion, group trust, seeking feedback as an opportunity for growth, as well as risk-taking, we think that it is important to kind of explore the impact that this construct has in a sport setting. So in this webinar, we're going to share with you what this construct is, clarify what it is not, highlight what the research has shown so far as it relates to both learning behaviors and team performance, and then also share what we're looking to understand better. So before we get into everything, I did want to take a moment and kind of introduce the team that's responsible for putting this together. And so you can kind of get a feel for who you're going to hear from tonight. So first, my name is Cari DeCandia. I'm an adjunct here at University of Western States. And then I also work as a performance consultant in both kind of the sport and corporate side. And a big focus of my work is on leadership development as well as culture. My research partner is Dr. Matt Condie. Dr. Condie, if you would share a bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Good morning from the future, everyone. Thank you for your time this evening. Things are looking pretty good for Friday morning. I'm also an adjunct faculty here at UWS and a CMPC working with individuals and teams. My interests lie in the areas of relationship, learning, and performance. So this is a topic that is a strong alignment with those areas of interest.
Awesome, thank you. And we also have Andrea Fallon-Korb and Melissa Aycock, who are doctoral students in the SPP program here at UWS and have been working with us on exploring the role that this construct has on learning behaviors. Andrea, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Fallon-Korb. I'm coming to you from upstate New York. I'm a doctoral student. My primary research interests lie within diversity, equity, and inclusion in sports. And right now, I'm currently a lecturer at SUNY Oneonta in New York.
Awesome. Thank you. Melissa, do you want to finish us off?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Melissa Aycock, and I am in Boulder, Colorado. And like Dr. DeCandia said, I'm also a doctoral student in the SPP program, and my areas of focus are multiculturalism, DEI and B, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I love to work with elite and high-performing athletes with performance fears and just helping those people get to their optimum state of well-being.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that is the team. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you think of a high-performing team, what are the factors that you think are critical? So think about it another way, actually. If you were the coach of a national team and you were tasked with putting together a dream team of athletes from all over the country, what are the characteristics that you would look for and or look to develop? So if you would open up your chat boxes and just type in one characteristic that you feel would contribute to becoming a high-performing team. Okay, so we have composure under all circumstances, coachability, definitely, connection, commitment. Any others that you guys can think of? Okay, communication. Sierra says team cohesion, definitely. Yes, 100% to all of those, because all of those characteristics we know play an important role in team performance. Now, through the research, we also know kind of the characteristics that have commonly shown to contribute to high levels of performance. And they include a lot of the things that you all mentioned, team cohesion and team chemistry, the ability to communicate effectively, having clear goals, having autonomy, supportive leaders. But what if there was another one? What if there was one component or one characteristic that was absolutely critical for consistent levels of high performance? And what we have discovered is that the research has shown that there is. And Andrea is going to introduce it to you.
All right. So who here has heard of the term psychological safety? So again, we're using the chat box here for a little bit. If you could just type in the chat box. Yeah, I've heard it before, never heard it. This is my first instance. Just kind of wanted to check in with you all. Awesome. So we've got a couple people who are pretty familiar with this. Awesome. Okay, so when you hear that term psychological safety, what are some words or phrases that kind of come up for you? So again, what words come to mind when you hear that term psychological safety? Inclusion, right? Trust, confidence. Awesome. Anything else that kind of comes up for you as you think about psychological safety? Well-being, for sure. Openness, absolutely. Communication, good. Awesome. Yeah. So it seems like a number of you have some familiarity with this. And a lot of those terms that you mentioned certainly fall in line with what psychological safety is. So just to give you a definition, so that we're all on the same page with exactly what psych safety is, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, psychological safety is really two different parts. Okay, so the first part is a shared belief that is held kind of throughout the team by all of the team members that this team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Okay, so interpersonal risk taking is really key. You may be asking yourself, what in the world does that exactly mean? But what that interpersonal risk taking means is that there's a belief that there is an environment that is safe for speaking up with ideas, questions, being able to discuss concerns that you may have. Really, it's an environment where it's really safe to make mistakes, to visibly make mistakes, to admit that you make mistakes that people may not have seen, and where you feel really comfortable not only making mistakes, but also admitting that. And again, it's this comfortability with also bringing up concerns. Okay. There is also this sense of confidence that coaches or teammates will not embarrass you when you do these things, or reject you, or punish you in any way, shape, or form for doing any of this risk taking. Okay. And so overall, there is the big sense of confidence that you as an individual and your voice is really valued and is a part of that team. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of put you in the scenario. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I want you to think about if you've ever been in a situation or an experience, whether sport related or not, okay, where you were on a team and were embarrassed by a coach, a leader, or a teammate after you asked a question. Okay, maybe you were rejected after presenting an idea that you thought was a great idea, but were kind of punished for that, and even punished after making a mistake. Okay. So hopefully you can maybe think of a situation or a scenario where that happened for you. So again, going to the chat box, what effect did this have on you? So in that situation where you were embarrassed after asking a question, rejected after presenting an idea, or punished when you made a mistake, what kind of an effect did that have on you as an individual? Yeah, second guessing yourself. Yeah, unworthiness for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to withdraw, pull away from the team for sure, lose confidence, be humiliated, maybe make you more timid, shame. Absolutely. That's a really vulnerable position to be in. So absolutely, right. It definitely has a really big impact on us when we have that. So now let's connect that to performance, right? So we're feeling some of these things that you just described. How does that influence your performance? Yeah, caught up in your head. Absolutely. Maybe kind of that analysis paralysis, right? You're kind of maybe overthinking some things. Yeah, a lot of times your performance is going to decline, right? You're not as connected with your teammates, your individuals, you're playing more timid. Yeah, self-sabotaging and just not trusting yourself. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. It can absolutely impact your motivation. Thanks. Right. So what I've just described, this is a psychologically unsafe environment, right? Disconnecting from others. Absolutely. Right. You're really going to kind of pull back. Right. This is an unsafe environment. So kind of the opposite of the definition that we just presented. And you can see kind of the negative impact that it can have on you, right? Both cognitively, emotionally, and ultimately your performance. But now let's flip the script, right? Let's look on the flip side of things to a psychologically safe environment. Okay. So now I want you to think about an experience that you may have had where you were on a team and you admitted a mistake or asked a question and you were thanked for doing this, right? Or, somebody was like, hey, thanks for really doing this. This is a great opportunity for us to learn, for us to improve as a team, and for us to really get stronger, right? If you've been in that situation or can kind of imagine that situation, what type of an experience, what type of an effect do you think that this would have on you? So again, you maybe made a mistake, asked a question, and were thanked for as an opportunity to learn, to improve, or become stronger. What kind of effect would that have on you? Yeah, increase your confidence, empowering, feel supported, right? More willing to take risks, get outside your comfort zone. Absolutely, right? So you can already see, depending on kind of the environment that's created, depending on the culture where a person is, it can have a really profound impact on, again, our cognitions, our emotions, and ultimately our performance. Okay, so now let's dig a little bit deeper in connecting kind of the psychologically safe and unsafe environments. So if you can go to the next slide. Awesome. Okay. So what you see on your screen is, psychological danger is that psychologically unsafe environment. Okay. And that's really where we're going to start. Okay. So characteristics of a team who have poor psychological safety include team members who are afraid to admit their mistakes because they really are worried about those negative consequences from their coaching staff, from other team members. Okay. Poor psychological safety also shows through team members who are quick to blame each other, maybe point the finger at somebody else for things that go wrong, holding different values and beliefs from others, and teams whose culture has a lot of conflict within it. These characteristics show a team with oftentimes poor communication skills, and they don't have that shared set of values. And a lot of times this is a really toxic culture. Overall, these types of teams are not able to reach their potential and or achieve peak performance on a regular basis. Okay, in contrast, going over to that green side, right? And psychologically safe teams are able to operate at that high level and are much more likely to be able to reach their potential. Team members feel really motivated to come to work, to come to practice, to go into games, causing them to be really productive and successful. Teams with high psychological safety operate with a growth mindset, and they're able to learn from each other as well as from their own mistakes. And psychologically safe teams are really supportive, right? They communicate that it's okay to be wrong, admit they don't know something. They also know that mistakes occur in our learning moments, right? There are those natural kind of things that are going to occur. And they're viewed as a necessity. My favorite analogy that I've come across in this research is you got to break eggs to make omelets, right? So those mistakes are going to happen. Those eggs are going to crack. But what do we do with it, right? How do we frame it? Do we frame it as this ability to make omelets and make something positive, stronger, really great thing? Or do we frame it as something that's really negative? Okay, these teams that have psychologically safe environments share ideas openly and are able to have and create productive discussions from a lot of different perspectives that allow them to be more innovative and make better strategic decisions. Okay, so if you can go to the next slide. So psychological safety, I'm seeing a lot, especially in this last year, I feel like. I don't know if the pandemic has anything to do with it, but it's not a new concept, even though it's kind of becoming more common in mass media. It's not actually new, and it's been studied ever since the 1960s, primarily within work organizational contexts. But one of the most, if not the most robust studies actually comes from Google. So we can go to the next slide. So Google, back in 2012, sought out to answer the question, what makes a really effective team, right? What are those characteristics of a peak performing team? They really became really hyper-focused on this question and spent millions upon millions of dollars over multiple years studying hundreds of teams that were within Google to try to figure out and to try to determine why some of those teams struggled while others were really, really successful. There was a huge research team that included statisticians, organizational psychologists, sociologists, and engineers. They measured a ton of different parts of employees' lives and scrutinized the smallest details of the work environment, like how frequently people ate together. Okay, you can go to the next slide. They codenamed this project Project Aristotle. And this was a tribute to Aristotle's quote, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, as Google researchers believed that employees could do more working together as a team than they could do as individuals working alone. So they spent 4 years, they looked at 180 teams, ran 35 statistical models, and used hundreds of variables, again, to try and understand peak performing teams and what really affected team effectiveness. And what they found, next slide, is that how a team works matters more than who is on the team. So again, to say that again, how a team works together is more important than who is actually on the team. So the most important factor that they found that underlied everything was psychological safety. Again, psychological safety referring to that individual's perception of the consequences of taking those interpersonal risks and a sense of confidence that team members will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. So in a team with high psychological safety, teammates feel really safe to take risks around their team members. Okay. So now that we're on the same page with what psychological safety is, we've got that understanding, I'm going to hand it off to Melissa to bust some myths that are associated with psychological safety.
Thanks so much, Andrea. So now that we have a general understanding of what psychological safety is, let's talk for a moment about what it's not. Next slide, please. So psychological safety is not a quick fix. It's not a cure-all. It actually provides a framework for organizations to start to have conversations about psychological safety itself, why it's important, what's the usefulness of it, and how it can be incorporated into the overall culture and environment that's being created. As Andrea spoke about, psychological safety supports learning. So when teams and athletes feel psychologically safe, then they are more likely to voice concerns, take those interpersonal risks, own their own mistakes, and learn from others' mistakes. And this is all more likely to take place in a psychologically safe environment. So if we look at it conversely, when psychological safety is absent from the environment, then learning is basically halted. And this is where people will try to hide their mistakes and errors, and that is an energy drain, not only on the person that is doing the hiding of the mistakes and errors, but it really is an energy drain on everyone in the environment. So with psychological safety, teams can experiment and grow. Without it, teams are reactive and hesitant. With it, teams can challenge each other and reach more informed decisions. And without it, teams are scared to challenge the established ways of doing things. And with psychological safety, teams can make continuous improvement a reality. Without it, they'll just keep going with the status quo. They don't inspect or adapt in the way that they work together. Next slide, please. So psychological safety is not a replacement for trust. Trust is definitely a huge component of psychological safety, but they're not the same thing. There's a bit of a difference there. So it is an essential component in building psychological safety within a team, but teams that are made up of high trust aren't necessarily completely psychologically safe spaces. Trust basically focuses on the individual. So it's the beliefs that one individual has about another, whereas psychological safety consists of beliefs that are concerning group norms, what it means to be a part of a group. So if we're looking at those big differences, and let's say I want to take a risk within my team. So if I'm thinking of this risk itself from the context of just trust, then my thought process might look something like, will you, a person on my team, will I, the person taking the risk, give others the benefit of the doubt when I take this risk? So looking at it through my own lens. If I'm looking at it from a psychological safety context, then it becomes, will others give me the benefit of the doubt when I am about to take this type of a risk? So trust, a little bit more individual, and psychological safety as a whole is really constructed of the group itself. Next slide, please. Psychological safety is also not an excuse to underperform, nor does it guarantee a spot on the team. So psychological safety isn't about avoiding accountability or tough decision-making or challenges. And, you know, in organizations where we see sort of this, oh, everything's fine, it's okay, everything's okay attitude and culture, that really represents low interpersonal risk-taking. And as Andrea spoke about, interpersonal risk-taking is really a huge hallmark of psychological safety. This is a place where creativity and innovation can thrive, and where individuals can engage in tough debates. They can rumble, they can work through conflict together. Psychological safety does not turn away from performance measures. It does tell teams, look, it's okay. You can come here, you can make mistakes, don't have to know everything. This is a place where you can be vulnerable, and we can also share a common passion. And next slide. Psychological safety is not a shield from toxic environments. It's not a way for us to navigate through a toxic environment. And in fact, leaders who use a fear or have a bit of tension to their leadership style, that will basically erode any psychological safety that might have existed beforehand. And like we talked about in the beginning, when we're not in a psychologically safe environment, ultimately what this means is that our performance is going to deteriorate. We also can't just use the psychological safety language and expect behavior to follow. We want people to understand that psychological safety, it doesn't shield us from anxiety, fear, worry, stress, adversity, trauma, all these normal, natural things a human being feels, but it does foster empowerment. So it's about the ability to fail, to get up, to try again, to learn from mistakes. Psychological safety is a great tool too to dismantle a hierarchy and sort of level our playing field, because it does not give preferential treatment to a star player, to the star athlete. It's a level playing field where everyone's voices can be heard. Now, having said that, it doesn't take the decision-making authority away from the leadership team for your coaching staff, for example, but what it truly does is it gives everyone a voice. So that increases engagement and collaboration. And what those things do is it better informs the decision-making process for that coach, for that leadership team. So if we're kind of in a nutshell looking at final thoughts on what psychological safety is not, it's not about being nice. It's not another word for trust. It's not this personality or it factor. And it's not about lowering our performance standards. Dr. Condie is up next, and he's going to talk to us about psychological safety and the learning process.
Thank you, Melissa. Let me just get that button from you to drive it home. What an amazing team that I'm working with, and what an amazing group of people that are on the call this evening. Before I jump into my spiel about psychological safety and learning, I'm just going to invite people to go to the chat function now and just type in a key message or a key takeaway that they've learned so far regarding psychological safety. For those who have been on a Zoom call with me, you are quite familiar with this process, so I can appreciate that it might take a moment to consider a key message or takeaway. It is certainly a framework rather than a quick fix. Thanks, Camille. Indeed, the difference between trust and psychological safety, and the influence the environment has, certainly. So this is all good and well in theory, and it looks great as a nice, neat little framework, but in reality, that's where the rubber meets the road. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we know and what we need to find out, which has led us to what we're attempting to study from a research perspective. So if we go to the next slide, we know that the factors associated with psychological safety across organization and sport are fairly consistent. Specifically, the trust, the collaboration, the communication, all the characteristics that each of you laid out in the chat function at the beginning of the call. We know that there are 2 or more individuals with specific roles working towards a common goal, and that positive outcomes are associated with an organizational psychological climate. Perceptions, being 9/10 of the law around how cohesive we are, have shown to forecast behavior in a sports setting. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to introduce to you a bit of neuroscience as it relates to learning and how learning is necessary for high performance. We're proposing that psychological safety is a conduit to learning, which therefore influences high performance. Biologically, the brain is prepared to be shaped by experiences. Learning requires repetition, feedback, reinforcement, success, and failure. So therefore, learning involves a strengthening of neural networks, taking the brain's network system from dirt tracks to a 5-lane motorway. A large part of the brain is involved in the social interaction and understanding of people. And our brains grow best in the context of supportive relationships, low levels of stress, and through the creative use of stories. Our brain is also highly aware of the social status, so this reward and threat system. And organizational settings are considered to be one of the highest environments where we see rewards and threats. Rewards increase the pleasure and make us feel good. Threats have the same pathway as if we're in physical pain. So to Andrea's example before, we're starting to see from a neuroscience perspective just the impact that feeling embarrassed, ridiculed, criticized is having on our performance, but also our neurochemistry. What we know from a neuroscience perspective as it relates to learning is that through neuroplasticity, the brain is molded by experiences to reshape and reorganize itself so that it can learn from the automaticity of skills. Achievable challenge, frequent feedback, releases dopamine, increases pleasure, increases perseverance, increases motivation. You start to see the theme here. So we have identified that learning is both necessary from high performance and that the environment influences learning significantly. The evolution of the social brain supports that close supportive relationships stimulate positive emotions, neuroplasticity, and learning. And then that lends to this increase of practice effect to increase that precision effect. Practice, precision, high performance. If we move to the next slide, we know that team learning is this continual process. It's a continual process of individual and team experimentation, taking those interpersonal and intrapersonal risks to support learning as it relates to performance. It's a continual process of team reflection and action, not this superficial reflection that can be classed as rumination of just what didn't work, but actually stepping into conversations and having meaningful considerations around what worked, what didn't work, an action plan around the next time that they perform, and everyone has a strong sense of role clarity. With that, it's a continual process of discussion of errors and unexpected outcomes, and also that continual feedback loop of seeking feedback. We know from a motor learning perspective that we require that feedback for that skill development and automaticity to occur. The same can be said from a psychological safety and learning behaviors perspective. We need that feedback from others in order for us to take that interpersonal or intrapersonal risk the next time we engage in a performance behavior. Vicarious reinforcement also occurs when we're in a psychologically safe environment. So if a coach is providing positive and constructive and supportive and cohesive feedback to one of your teammates, that can potentially have a vicarious effect on our own ability to self-correct, reset, refocus, remotivate. So that vicarious flow-on effect that feedback has on a team can also help be facilitated by a psychologically safe environment. Moving on to the next slide, we also understand that psychological safety supports self-efficacy when managing change. The belief in the capacity to execute changes is going to be higher when we have these fundamental characteristics within a psychologically safe environment. Individuals know why, how, and what to do to perform. Moving on to the next slide, we know that team performance, through the research, we know that team performance has an influence on individual effort. It influences leader-athlete relationships, and it also influences team member relationships. So this horizontal cohesion between athletes and team members, but also that vertical cohesion between athletes and leaders. Moving on to the next slide. We also know that there is a positive correlation between team learning behaviors and team psychological safety, which leads us to our next point of what we need to understand better within a sporting context. We need to understand whether there is some transferability of psychological safety in organizational settings as it applies to a sporting and performance setting. We want to understand the key roles and relationships in sport that foster and maintain psychological safety. I think it was Camille that mentioned it before. It's a framework that needs to be developed and it needs to be maintained. And we want to understand the unique nuances within sport that create and maintain psychological safety. We want to understand the relationship between psychological safety and team learning in a specific sporting environment, and how psychological safety can support performance variables that we so happen to talk about quite a bit in our studies around motivation, confidence, and resilience. Finally, we're seeking to understand the role that psychological safety in sport is and how it can influence us developing applied interventions for leaders to cultivate psychological safety. We are at an entrance point, if you will, around understanding the lay of the land of psychological safety in sport. And in order for us to execute it on an applied level, we got to understand that unique framework that psychological safety is within a sporting environment. Which lends us to our research question and our final slide of me ranting on, is this. We are seeking to investigate the role that psychological safety has on learning behaviors in collegiate athletes. What's going to be really interesting about this research is because we are opening it up to multiple sports, there may be specific nuances that come out from the data to understand what psychological safety and learning might look like between sports. So it's going to be an interesting exploration and an adventure to go on. I'm going to hand over to Dr. DeCandia now for the final wrap up and any questions, thoughts, comments, suggestions, additions, changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Condie. So first, I just want to throw it out there and see if anyone has any questions about any of the material that we covered this evening, or in Dr. Condie's case, in the morning. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat, and you can also unmute yourself and just ask. Okay, so do you think there will be a big difference between sports that are more based on the individual compared to ones that focus heavily on the team? That's a really great question. I know some of the literature and any of you all jump in to add also, but one of the things that we were seeing is that the psychological safety between the vertical levels, so between coach athlete, was actually much stronger and had a much bigger impact than psychological safety on the horizontal level, so between teammates. So I'm not sure what if there is going to be a difference between individual based sports versus team sports, because there is, you still have the leader follower aspect. What do you all think on that? That's just my hypothesis. We haven't obviously studied this yet. Dr. Condie, Melissa?
It'll be interesting to see what comes out in the data.
Yeah. That's a great question, though. Any other thoughts or questions on this topic? Dr. Castillo, what measures exist to measure this construct in sport currently? So the dominant assessment for psychological safety was developed by Amy Edmondson, who is the kind of leading researcher on this construct in an organizational setting. There is not specifically a assessment that was developed for sport. However, the questions are applicable in a sport context. Dr. Condie, do you want to field Allie's question?
Very relevant reflection, Allie. This is, I would hypothesize that sport ethic would have an influence. And again, we are merely tapping into the multiple gaps in the research of this construct within sport. And so what we know from a research process perspective, psychological safety is the hub, and these specific variables might be the spoke that we branch off and further research, or we may identify that sport ethic needs to be investigated further, which is really cool from a research perspective, because we continue the research process to better understand the narrative of psychological safety in sport. I feel like that we're literally at the forward part before chapter 1 of this kind of narrative of psychological safety in sport.
Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, so before we sign off, I do have one question for you all, because we are going to be studying psychological safety within collegiate athletes. and collegiate athletic teams. If any of you all work within this environment, or have access to collegiate teams, and think that they may be interested in participating, would love for you all to reach out to either myself or Dr. Condie, and then we can get in touch with you about what that process would look like as far as sending the survey out and kind of getting this research kicked off. So if no one else has any questions, that is all we have for you this evening on this topic. And we so appreciate your time and attending and your interest in this topic. Again, it's become definitely a huge passion of mine, and I can't speak for the rest of the team, but I would say it's probably high up there. So thank you all.
This recording will be made available if you so happen to seek to peruse it a second time. And again, we are always open for an email or a Zoom call around this stuff, so we can get on our